Hi friends, you've seen which legends are in relationships and which legends are best friends, but did you know some legends are also mortal enemies? So today I return to my mission to bring back Apex Legends lore by taking you through the story of all the worst enemies in the Apex Legends story. And let's start with the current enemies that we know of. The easiest has got to be Octane and Revenant. Now I call this one easy, but it might also be surprising to some of you, which is why we're starting with it. Because if we're being honest, Octane doesn't really strike you as the legend that might hold revenge in his heart. However, a little while back, Eduardo Silva, Octane's father, or to be more precise, his grandfather disguised as his father, hatched a plan with the goal to increase his power and control across the Outlands, and the plan was to use Revenant as his tool. Now Octane was with him on that mission, at the expense of his close friendships with Lifeline and the other legends. Things went wrong very quickly though, and essentially it ended with Revenant killing Eduardo Silva by him and his minions stabbing Eduardo through the back and then continuously right in front of Octane. Now obviously Octane was very shocked and saddened by this. He wasn't super close to his father or grandfather in this case, but family is family. And let's face it, you can't watch your father or grandfather get slaughtered in front of you and not hold some kind of revenge or desire for justice and therefore class the person that did it as your enemy. And we also saw how hurt Octane was by the loss of Eduardo at Eduardo's funeral, when Octane was kind of stumbling over his words while trying to give the eulogy. Thus, Revenant has become Octane's worst enemy in the lore of Apex Legends. Now unfortunately we've not seen too much more, but you can definitely be assured that Octane definitely doesn't like Revenant, and there's something boiling under the covers that might very well come to fruition at some point. Now speaking of Revenant and revenge, we can't really talk about that without speaking of Loba. And it's been going on a long time in the story. However, things, as you might expect, have not been resolved, and therefore it's fair to say Loba and Revenant are still the worst of enemies. In case you didn't know, Loba's hatred of Revenant dates back to when she was just a young child. Loba was the daughter of some very successful thieves, but one day a mercenary was assigned a mission to eliminate Marcus Andrade, aka Loba's father, who just so happened to be one of those very successful thieves. Of course, that mercenary was none other than Revenant, and like usual he succeeded in his mission, and this left a young Loba without parents, meaning she was taken into care, but all the while harbouring that desire for revenge against Revenant. Eventually, Loba would go on to realise she had her parents' gift of essentially being able to steal anything from anyone, and this allowed her to grow up into one of the world's most renowned thieves in her own right. She even found a friend in her mission of revenge when she one day rescued a blue-haired boy. And as we've seen so far through the story of Apex Legends, Loba's attempted to enact her mission of revenge multiple times against Revenant. Pretty much every time though hasn't quite gone to plan. Of course, one of those examples saw her blow up Skull Town on Kings Canyon, and the more recent example saw her fail when Revenant decided to take full control of himself, and therefore these two remain the worst of enemies. Next up on our list of enemies, we've got Ashe and Horizon, another rivalry that stems back a long time. This one technically goes back even further in time than the others we've seen so far. You see, Ashe is a simulacrum, but before that, she was a human called Dr. Ashley Reed, and she was working with Horizon on a project to save the Outlands, and this led to the two of them becoming fairly close friends. Horizon even trusted Ashe to babysit her son Newton on many occasions, and you might even say Ashe was fond of Newton. Of course, that project to save the Outlands was all about the discovery of Beranthium, and the fact that that became such a valuable resource led to Ashe going on to betray Horizon. And Ashe did this by simply leaving Horizon stranded in space, while Ashe returned to Olympus to work on the refining of Beranthium. Now this betrayal not only left Horizon stranded in space, but it also meant she would never see her beloved son Newton again. And while Horizon would eventually return 87 years later, and in that time Ashe would go on to be stabbed through the chest by one of Watson's relatives and turn into the simulacrum, and this led to the two of them being modern day enemies in the games of Apex Legends. And while we haven't seen too much in this story recently, Alter arriving might just change that. Let's look at some of the Legend's worst enemies outside of the Apex games. We've got Jackson and the Forgotten Families. Unfortunately for Jackson, this is an enemy he kind of inherited from the old Newcastle. You see, the original Newcastle was deep in debt with a group of gangsters known as the Forgotten Families. They run Harris Valley and a number of areas around there. Newcastle was banking on himself being able to get into the Apex games to earn the money to pay back the Forgotten Families. The sad thing is, the original Newcastle just wasn't good enough to get through the qualifiers to join the Apex games. One day, Jackson Williams, under the guise of Lamont Craig, inadvertently got in the middle of the original Newcastle and the Forgotten Families, dueling it out over that debt. And while Jackson came to the rescue of Newcastle, although not quite in time, it led to him taking over the mantle of Newcastle, and essentially this made Jackson take over the deal with the Forgotten Families to become the keeper and protector of Harris Valley, but owing a significant debt to the Forgotten Families. And I think it's fair to say the kind of people that hold a debt over your head are probably the kind of people you'd consider your worst enemies. Now, sticking with the theme of Legends having enemies outside of the Apex games, we've got Rampart and Big Sister. If you don't know who Big Sister is, she's essentially a rival of Rampart that dates back all the way to her fighting days in the arenas on Gaia. Big Sister's the leader of the local gang called the Sisters, and they specialised in modding weapons, but also fixing fights in the arenas for profits. And that's where Rampart's story intertwines with Big Sister's. Because one day, the Sisters wanted Rampart to throw a gauntlet match. But instead of throwing the match, Rampart went on to win it, at a significant cost to Big Sister. Unfortunately for Rampart, Big Sister didn't let sleeping dogs lie, and she would go on to enact her revenge by burning down Rampart's beloved shop on Gaia. Rampart lost everything in that fire, and that ignited her feud with Big Sister and her gang. Rampart's feud with Big Sister increased even further when the Nemesis was released into the Apex games. It was a weapon produced by Big Sister and her gang and bought up by the Syndicate for the Apex games. However, the original designs were actually created by Rampart, and so Rampart kind of sees it as Big Sister stealing her invention. What's funny is Big Sister would even go on to try to recruit Rampart again, sending Francis to try and convince her. But Rampart doesn't forgive and forget so easily, and this led to a very violent refusal. And this all but continues Rampart and Big Sister's feud, showing them for now to be the worst of enemies. Let's move on to two slightly more fun enemies. We've got Bloodhound as Raven Arthur, and Pathfinder. Okay, maybe it's a bit of a stretch to call them worst enemies, but there's definitely something there. If you pay close attention, there's enough interactions between the two of them where either you'll get Arthur attacking Pathfinder, or you'll get Pathfinder trying to punch the living daylights out of the Raven. Now, we don't have any solid lore stories for exactly why this happens, but there are a good few theories. One key reason is suggested that Arthur's Raven is a representative of their people, a people that believe in the old ways, and that means free of technology and instead believing in the subsistence of the planet and the belief in nature itself. It's also said that Arthur the Raven is a spiritual representation of Bloodhound's Uncle Arthur. Uncle Arthur died when Bloodhound was young, and obviously Arthur really believed in the old ways, and therefore when you combine these two thoughts with the fact that Pathfinder is 100% technology, theory is that's why the Raven Arthur is so against Pathfinder. Of course, there's also the simple fact that ravens like shiny things, and it doesn't get more shiny than the metal robot that is Pathfinder. Now let's finish with one that we can consider were worst enemies, but maybe in today's world aren't enemies anymore, and that is Bangalore and Wraith. Well, actually, Wraith kind of liked Bangalore, but unfortunately Bangalore hated Wraith, and the story behind this is really interesting, but also quite subtle. You see, Bangalore a while ago was searching for her brother, whom she still believed to be alive, even though most people thought he was dead. She managed to infiltrate a facility where she believed the computer would contain information leading to Jackson's whereabouts. At the same time, a Void Walker broke into that same facility looking for information on Amir Singh. That Void Walker ended up setting the whole system on fire while taking on soldiers that were guarding the facility. Unfortunately for Bangalore, the USB drive that she was using in the computer at the time was stuck in there when the fire took hold, and therefore she lost all the files she was trying to get on Jackson's location. Of course, that Voidwalker was an alternate version of Wraith, and essentially this meant Bangalore blamed Wraith for not being able to find her brother, and that kind of ignited her hatred, viewing Wraith as her enemy. In fact, that version of the Wraith, the Voidwalker Wraith, is the one that ended up bringing the current version of Wraith that we've got to our dimension. Eventually though, our current Wraith was able to explain all of this to Bangalore, so I think it's fair to say, while at one time Bangalore might have seen Wraith as her enemy, we can consider that something in the past. However, there are a whole bunch more interesting stories of legends who were enemies in the past but are now friends, so I might do a different video to cover that, and if you want to see that kind of lore, let me know in the comments. For now though, thank you for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you later.